Live. You're live. All right, let's scooch you over. Let's scooch over so it's not so bright. There we go. Oh, hang on. I thought I was ready, but I'm not. Let's kind of get this situation set up. And I don't know, something weird happened with the video, so hopefully it went through. There we go. There we go. Let's get that. Let's get that. Let's get that. Let's get comfy. So now I'm early again tonight. I guess I do have to go to bed early because I have appointments. So there we got the faux fireplace, wood stove. Got my little salt lampy thing going on, Himalaya. So hopefully everybody's warm and cozy. Those of you who got caught in this mega, maybe this is too close to me. Oops. In this mega storm. I know my mom got about 2 feet in New York, maybe more. I know one of my aunts got about 3 feet in Jersey. I know my cousins in Long Island and my nephew, they got a couple feet of snow there, probably pushing 3, and not including drifts and stuff like that. We got snow here, but it was heavy too, but it came in and then it was not warm enough for it to stick around. We got a couple inches, but it's gone actually. They came out and shoveled, but they didn't really have any. I mean, before they finished shoveling, it was melting. But we are due for more snow this week, so that might make up for it. We might end up getting snow. I got Cassie staring at me. I think I got everything situated here. And we're going to begin with reading chapter 4. I may just do one chapter. We'll see how it goes. I just wanted to put out a trigger warning, which I probably should have done in the beginning because it's about slavery, and Frederick's pretty clear on what was going on. Horrible, the horrors of it all. But anyway, so chapter 4 on page 20. So if anybody went to the internet, you can get this copyright-free version and download it as a PDF. You can go to the internetarchive.org and you can create a profile. I mean, I've had that profile for years, and I always borrow books and, for free. So you can go and you can download it, and you'll have your own copy. Download it to PDF version. All right, let me get this out of the way. So, all right, chapter 4. Mr. Hopkins remained but a short time in the office of overseer. Why his career was so short, I do not know. But suppose he lacked the necessary severity to suit Colonel Lloyd. So this was an overseer who replaced the horrific, brutal overseer who passed away. And hopefully he's still burning in hell. But I guess this new overseer was too nice, as that goes. So Mr. Hopkins was succeeded by Mr. Austin Gore, a man possessing in an eminent degree all those traits of character indispensable to what is called a first-rate overseer. Mr. Gore had served Colonel Lloyd in the capacity of overseer upon one of the out farms, and had shown himself worthy of the high station of overseer upon the home or great house farm. Mr. Gore was proud, ambitious, and persevering. He was artful, cruel, and obdurate. Let's look that word up because I've never heard that word before. Let's see if I could. I think I should be able to do it right from here. I've done it. Let's see. Well, that's not it. All right. Let's try that again. Obdurate. Come on. Come on. I might have to turn my AC on because it feels a little warm in here. I mean, we got great heat, but it's a little too great. So, obdurate. Obdurate. Okay. Obdurate is an adjective pronounced obdurate, meaning stubbornly refusing to change one's mind, opinion, or course of action, often in the face of persuasion. Originating from Latin obdurare, to harden, it implies being hard headed or inflexible. Huh. I used to be called hard headed growing up. I suppose I still am. Okay, so I won't continue to do that. I just was curious. That word came up a few times. He was just the man for such a place, and it was just the place for such a man. It afforded scope for the full exercise of all his powers, and he seemed to be perfectly at home in it. He was one of those who could torture the slightest look, word, or gesture on the part of the slave into impudence, and would treat it accordingly. There must be no answering back to him. No explanation was allowed a slave, showing himself to have been wrongly accused. So they couldn't, yeah. Mr. Gore acted fully up to the maxim laid down by slaveholders. It is better that a dozen slaves suffer under the lash than the overseer should be convicted in the presence of the slaves of having been at fault. No matter how innocent a slave might be, it availed him nothing. When accused by Mr. Gore, it availed him nothing when accused by Mr. Gore of any misdemeanor. To be accused was to be convicted. That's it. I mean, and we can say the same here in this country. To be accused was to be convicted, and to be convicted was to be punished. The one always follows the other with immutable certainty. To escape punishment was to escape accusation, and few slaves had the fortune to do either under the overseership of Mr. Gore. He was just proud enough to demand the most debasing homage of the slave and quite servile enough to crouch himself at the feet of the master. He was ambitious enough to be contented with nothing short of the highest rank of overseers and persevering enough to reach the height of his ambition. He was cruel enough to inflict the serviced, I'm sorry, to inflict the severest punishment, artful enough to descend to the lowest trickery, and obdurate enough to be insensible to the voice of a reproving conscience. Conscience. He was of all the overseers the most dreaded by the slaves. His presence was painful. His eye flashed confusion. His eye flashed confusion, and seldom was his sharp, shrill voice heard without producing horror and trembling in their ranks. Mr. Gore was a grave man, and though a young man, he indulged in no jokes, in no funny words, seldom smiled. His words were in perfect keeping with his looks, and his looks were in perfect keeping with his words. Overseers will sometimes indulge in a witty word, even with the slaves. Not so with Mr. Gore. I wonder if, like Al Gore, if there's a tie, because you know, I'm curious about that. He spoke but to command, and commanded but to be obeyed. He dealt sparingly with his words and bountifully with his whip, never using the former, which the latter would answer as well. When he whipped, he seemed to do so from a sense of duty and feared no consequences. He did nothing reluctantly, no matter how disagreeable, always at his post, never inconsistent. He never promised but to fulfill. He was, in a word, a man of the most inflexible firmness and stone like coolness. His savage barbarity was equaled only by the consummate coolness with which he committed the grossest and most savage deeds upon the slaves under his charge. Mr. Gore once undertook to whip one of Colonel Lloyd's slaves by the name of Demby. He had given Demby but but few stripes, when to get rid of the scourging he ran and plunged himself into a creek and stood there at the depth of his shoulders, refusing to come out. Mr. Gore told him that he would give him 3 calls, and that if he did not come out at the third call, he would shoot him. The first call was given. Demby made no response, but stood his ground. The second and third calls were given with the same result. Mr. Gore then, without consultation or deliberation with anyone, not even giving Denby an additional call, raised his musket to his face, taking deadly aim at his standing victim, and in an instant poor Denby was no more. His mangled body sank out of sight, and blood and brains marked the water where he had stood. Ugh. A thrill of horror flashed through every soul upon the plantation, excepting Mr. Gore. He alone seemed cool and collected. Oh, it's just like, oof, oof. And there are people who still are like that and that are raising their children like that. Like, it stunned me that young people, teens, and early 20s had mindsets of people from my in the 60s and 50s that were carried over for generation upon generation upon generation, that they just keep on breeding. So I remember Oprah once saying, oh, eventually they're all going to die off. No, they keep on breeding. Oof. He alone seemed cool and collected. He was asked by Colonel Lloyd and my old master why he resorted to his extraordinary expedient. His reply was, as well as I can remember, that Demby had become unmanageable. Sound familiar? He resisted. He resisted. He was setting a dangerous example to the other slaves, one which, if suffered to pass without such demonstration on his part, would finally lead to the total subversion of all rule and order upon the plantation. He argued that if one slave refused to be corrected and escaped with his life, the other slaves would soon copy the example, the result of which would be the freedom of the slaves and the enslavement of the whites. And they still act like that. They still believe that. They still believe that if blacks come into power, that they're gonna, which they rightly should be, would be treated just the way they've been treating blacks for hundreds and hundreds of years. That that in turn the blacks are going to take over. That's what a lot of this is driven by. But nobody's crueler than them. Nobody's more deranged than they are. And they don't seem to get that. Whatever. So, again, I'm going to read that, which would be the freedom of the slaves and the enslavement of the whites. Mr. Gore's defense was satisfactory. He was continued in his station as overseer upon the home plantation. His fame as an overseer went abroad. His horrid crime was not even submitted to just judicial investigation. It was committed in the presence of slaves, and they, of course, could neither institute a suit nor testify against him. And thus, the guilty perpetrator of one of the bloodiest and most foul murders goes unwhipped of justice and uncensured by the community in which he lives. Mr. Gore lived in St. Michael's, Talbot County, Maryland. When I left there, and if he is still alive, he very, very probably lives there now. And if so, he is now, as he was then, as highly esteemed, as much respected as though his guilty soul had not been stained with his brother's blood. So hopefully he's burning in hell. Still. I speak advisedly when I say this, that killing a slave or any colored person in Talbot County, Maryland, is not treated as a crime, either by the courts or the community. Mr. Thomas Landman of St. Michael's killed 2 slaves, one of whom he killed with a hatchet by knocking his brains out. He used to boast of the commission of the awful and bloody deed. I have heard him do so laughingly, saying, among other things, that he was the only benefactor of his country in the company, and that when others would do as much as he had done, we should be relieved of the damned, and I can't say it, so N word. I can't say that word. Aside from the time when I was called that and I went home and my mother said, never use that word. I can't say it. Even when we took it back, I can't say it. It just hurts me to my soul. The wife, I mean, I should say it for context, for to hit home, but I think the horror of what I just read says it all. The wife of Mr. Giles Hick, living but a short distance from where I used to live, murdered my wife's cousin, a young girl between 15 and 16 years of age, mangling her person in the most horrible manner, breaking her nose and breastbone with a stick so that the poor girl expired in a few hours afterward. She was immediately buried, but had not been in her untimely grave but a few hours before she was taken up and examined by the coroner, who decided that she had come to death by severe beating. The offense for which this girl was thus murdered was this: she had been set that night to mind Mrs. Hick's baby, and during the night she fell asleep and the baby cried. She, having lost her rest for several nights previous, did not hear the crying. They were both in the room with Mrs. Hicks. Mrs. Hicks, finding the girl slow to move, jumped from her bed, seized an oak stick of wood by the fireplace, and with it broke the girl's nose and breastbone, and thus ended her life. Oh, yeah. In my, women can be just as or more cruel. I will not say that this most horrid murder produced no sensation in the community. It did produce sensation, but not enough to bring the murderess to punishment. There was a warrant issued for her arrest, but it was never served. Thus, she escaped not only punishment, but even the pain of being arraigned before a court for her horrid crime. Whilst I am detailing bloody deeds which took place during my stay on Colonel Lloyd's plantation, I will briefly narrate another, which occurred about the same time as the murder of Denby by Mr. Gore. Colonel Lloyd's slaves were in the habit of spending a part of their nights and Sundays in fishing for oysters. In this way, made up the deficiency of their scanty allowance. And in this way, an old man belonging to Colonel Lloyd, while thus engaged, happened to get beyond the limits of Colonel Lloyd's and on the premises of Mr. Beale Bonley. At this trespass, Mr. Bonley took offense, and with his musket came down to the shore and blew its deadly contents into the poor old man. Mr. Bonley came over to see Colonel Lloyd the next day, whether to pay him for his property or to justify himself in what he had done, I know not. At any rate, this whole fiendish transaction was soon hushed up. There was very little said about it at all, and nothing done. It was a common saying, even among little white boys, that it was worth a half-cent to kill an N and a half-cent to bury one. I just can't bring myself to say it even in reading. Chapter 5. As to my own treatment while I lived on Colonel Lloyd's plantation, it was very similar to that of the other slave children. I was not old enough to work in the field, and there being little else than field work to do, I had a great deal of leisure time. The most I had to do was to drive up the cows at evening, keep the fowls out of the garden, keep the front yard clean, and run of errands for my old master's daughter, Miss Lucretia Old. Most of my leisure time I spent in helping Master Daniel Lloyd in finding his birds after he had shot them. My connection with Master Daniel was of some advantage to me. He became quite attached to me and was sort of a protector of me. He would not allow the older boys to impose upon me, and would divide his cakes with me. I was seldom whipped by my old master, and suffered little from anything else than hunger and cold. I suffered much from hunger, but much more from cold. In the hottest summer and the coldest winter, I was kept almost naked. No shoes, no stockings, no jacket, no trousers, nothing on but a coarse toe linen shirt, reaching only to my knees. I had no bed. I must have perished with cold, but that, the coldest nights, I used to steal in a bag, which was used for carrying corn to the mill. No, I had no bed. I must have perished with cold, but that, the coldest night, I used to steal a bag which was used for carrying corn to the mill. I would crawl into this bag and there sleep on the cold, damp clay floor with my head in and feet out. My feet have been so cracked with frost that the pen with which I'm writing might be laid in the gashes. We were not regularly allowanced. Our food was coarse corn meal boiled. This was called mush. It was put into a large wooden tray or trough, and sat down upon the ground. Like the children were then called, like so many pigs, and like so many pigs, they would come and devour the mush. Some with oyster shells, others with pieces of shingle, some with naked hands, and none with spoons. He that ate fastest got most. He that was strongest secured the best place, and few left the trough satisfied. I was probably between 7 and 8 years old when I left Colonel Lloyd's plantation. I left it with joy. I shall never forget the ecstasy with which I received the intelligence that my old master, Anthony, had determined to let me go to Baltimore to live with Mr. Hugh Old, brother to my old master's son in law, Captain Thomas Old. I received this information about 3 days before my departure. They were three of the happiest days I ever enjoyed. I spent the most part of all 3 days in the creek, washing off the plantation scurf and preparing myself for departure. The pride of appearance which this would indicate was not my own. I spent the time in washing not so much because I wished to, but because Mrs. Lucretia had told me I must get all the dead skin off my feet and knees before I could go to Baltimore. For the people in Baltimore were very cleanly and would laugh at me if I looked dirty. Besides, she was going to give me a pair of trousers, which I should not put on unless I got all the dirt off me. The thought of owning a pair of trousers was great indeed. It was almost a sufficient motive not only to make me take off what would be called pig drovers, the mange, but the skin itself. I went at it in good earnest, working for the first time with the hope of reward. The ties that ordinarily bind children to their homes were all suspended in my case. I found no severe trial in my departure. My home was charmless. It was not home to me. On parting from it, I could not feel that I was leaving anything which I could have enjoyed by staying. My mother was dead, my grandmother lived far off, so I seldom saw her. I had two sisters and one brother that lived in the same house with me, but the early separation of us from our mother had well nigh blotted the fact of our relationship from our memories. I have to look up and see if there's any descendants, either directly from him or from his brothers and sisters or from his father's stuff. There has to be. I looked for home elsewhere and was confident of finding none which I should relish less than the one which I was leaving. If, however, I found in my new home hardship, hunger, whipping, and nakedness, I had the consolation that I should never have escaped any one of them by staying. Having already had more than a taste of them in the house of my old master, and having endured them there, I very naturally inferred my ability to endure them elsewhere, and especially at Baltimore. For I had something of the feeling about Baltimore that is expressed in the proverb that being hanged in England is preferable to dying a natural death in Ireland. I had the strongest desire to see Baltimore. Cousin Tom, though not fluent in speech, had inspired me with that desire by his eloquent description of the place. I could never point out anything at the great house, no matter how beautiful or powerful, but that he had seen something at Baltimore far exceeding both its in beauty and strength, the object which I pointed out to him. Even the great house itself, with all its pictures, was far inferior to many buildings in Baltimore. So strong was my desire that I thought a gratification of it would fully compensate for whatever loss of comforts I should sustain by the exchange. I left without a regret and with the highest hopes of future happiness. We sailed out of Miles River for Baltimore on a Saturday morning. I remember only the day of the week, for at that time I had no knowledge of the days of the month, nor the months of the year. On setting sail, I walked aft and gave to Colonel Lloyd's plantation what I hoped would be the last look. I then placed myself in the bows of the sloop and there spent the remainder of the day in looking ahead, interesting myself in what was in the distance rather than things nearby or behind. In the afternoon of that day, we reached Annapolis, the capital of the state. We stopped but a few moments, so that I had no time to go on shore. It was the first large town I had ever seen, and and though it would look small compared with some of our New England factory villages, I thought it was a wonderful place for its size, more imposing even than the Great House Farm. We arrived at Baltimore early on Sunday morning, and it's still really nice there. It is more imposing even than Great House Farm. We arrived at Baltimore early on Sunday morning, landing at Smith's Wharf, not far from Bowley's Wharf. We had on board the sloop a large flock of sheep, and after aiding in driving them to the slaughterhouse of Mr. Curtis on Loudon Slater's Hill, I was conducted by Rich, one of the hands belonging on board of the sloop, to my new home in Aliciana Street, near Mr. Gardner's shipyard on Fells Point. Phew, that was a mouthful. Mr. and Mrs. Ould were both at home and met me at the door with their little son Thomas, to take care of whom I had been given. And here I saw that I had never seen what I had never seen before. It was a white face beaming with the most kindly emotions. It was the face of my new mistress, Sophia Ould. I wish I could describe the rapture that flashed through my soul as I beheld it. It was a new and strange sight to me, brightening up my pathway with the light of happiness. Little Thomas was told there was his Freddie, and I was told to take care of little Thomas, and thus I entered upon the duties of my new home with the most cheering prospect ahead. I look upon my departure from Colonel Lloyd's plantation as one of the most interesting events of my life. It is possible, and even quite probable, that but for the mere circumstance of being removed from that plantation to Baltimore, I should have today, instead of being here seated by my own table in the enjoyment of freedom and the happiness of home, writing this narrative, being confined in the galling chains of slavery. I have to read that again. I look upon my departure from Colonel Lloyd's plantation as one of the most interesting events of my life. It is possible, and even quite probable, that but for the mere circumstance of being removed from that plantation to Baltimore, I should have today, instead of being here seated by my own table in the enjoyment of freedom and the happiness of home, writing this narrative, being confined in the galling chains of slavery. Going to live at Baltimore laid the foundation and opened the gateway to all my subsequent prosperity. I have ever I have ever regarded it as the first plain manifestation of that kind providence which has ever since attended me and marked my life with so many favors. I regarded the selection of myself as being somewhat remarkable. There was a number of slave children that might have been sent from the plantation to Baltimore. There were those younger, those older, and those of the same age. I was chosen from among them all, and was the first, last, and only choice. I may be deemed superstitious and even egotistical in regarding this event as a special interposition of divine providence in my favor. But I should be false to the earliest sentiments of my soul if I suppress the opinion. I prefer to be true to myself, even at the hazard of incurring the ridicule of others, rather than to be false and incur my own abhorrence. From my earliest recollection, I date the entertainment of a deep conviction that slavery would not always be able to hold me within its foul embrace, and in the darkest hours of my career in slavery, this living word of faith and the spirit of hope departed not from me, but remained like ministering angels to cheer me through the gloom. This good spirit was from God, and to him I offer thanksgiving and praise. So I think that we're going to close with that, and that was the end of chapter 5. And so I will continue tomorrow. Well, that was short, 35, but I do have to get up early. So I will continue tomorrow with chapter 6 and maybe read some more because, again, I would like to finish his book before the end of Black History Month. And it's also the month that he passed away. And so Black History Month was in memory of Frederick Douglass and of Abraham Lincoln. So uh, it's so weird because I have his book up on my shelf, and that book I can't read because it's like it's not a remake, but there's a gentleman, a professor, who wrote some stuff in it, so he copyrighted it. So I can't read out of that, but I can read out of the narrative that I downloaded from Internet Archive. So with that, I wish everybody a good night. Thanks for watching, and stay warm and safe, and hopefully you're not buried in 3 feet of snow. And again, thanks for listening. Good night.